Good morning, everybody, and thank you for taking the time to join us today. I'm really grateful to have your presence on this webinar, and I'd like to introduce you to Karabo Moloko, our South African Cyber South Africa CEO, who's going to be taking you through Directive 8 and what that means for you and how we can potentially assist you. So Karabo, without further ado, over to you.
Thank you, Shiona. Good morning, everybody. We don't have much time, so let's get into it. Very quickly, just to share a little bit about Cybran. We are a 31-year-old organization, been working with customers across the continent and in different parts of the world. And at the core, we enable our customers with digital solutions that helps them comply to legislation like Directive 8, as well as find digital ways and automated ways to enable their business and transform their business in being a lot more effective. Today, we're going to specifically focus on just a couple of elements. Firstly, we want to start off by giving you a little bit of background and the legislative context that has brought about Directive 8. Then what we'll do is we'll go straight in and unpack the elements of Directive 8 that you want to be aware of. And as you're putting your compliance program together, want to be sure that you meet and do to meet the requirements of the directive. And then I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Gerard, who will then get into how we as Cybran can enable you and accelerate your process of complying, and most importantly, make sure that it's digital and makes it easier for you to be able to show and assure your organization when it comes to Directive 8. So let's get into it. Just some context in case you want to better understand on why Directive 8 and where it comes from. Firstly, South Africa is part of FATF, which is the Financial Actions Task Force. This is a global or international governing body that has all the member countries define standard policies, procedures to be able to assure and remove the risk of anti-money laundering, counter-terrorist financing, or proliferations of weapons of mass destruction. And South Africa is a member of this. As a matter of fact, we're the only African country that actually sits as a member. How this body works is that all the member countries then go through a process of peer review against different compliance elements. And depending on how you score on each one, there are recommendations that comes from this body that you can then take as a country and then put measures in place to make sure that you are reducing or removing the risk of AML, CFT, and CPT. And not so long ago, we went through one of these reviews, which then triggered the grey listing. But relevant for this webinar, it then created and exposed some of the gaps that we have as a country. And in trying to implement the recommendations of that review, as well as remove the risk, Directive 8 was then issued. Directive 8 was issued by the FIC, so South Africa's Financial Intelligence Center, who are mandated by the FIC Act from government to then look at all things anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism. And they intent is to ensure that when it comes to AML and CFT, that as a nation, we have the right regulation in place that guides our compliance across the different controls. And the FIC has got mandate, as in the FIC Act, to issue directives. Now, directives are aspects, while they are not acts, but they're aspects of legislation that the affected institutions have to comply with. If you fail to comply, you will then expose your organization to sanctions as well as penalties. Directive 8 was issued on the 31st of March this year. and it became effective on the very same day, meaning compliance is required already at this point. Lots of legislations, we usually have a little bit of time to comply. This was not the case coming out of the peer review, especially because of how we were exposed as a nation. So as we stand today, your organization should already be complying with the elements of Directive 8, failing which sanctions and penalties could be applied. At the core, the essence of Directive 8, the purpose of it is to really mitigate a very, very specific gap, which I'll share when we get into unpacking, and that related to the exposure that organization has, not when it comes to their suppliers or their customers, but internal to their organization. Let's begin to unpack a little bit of what's Directive 8. I think just to summarize it, it really is what you see there. It applies to accountable institutions, and I'll share who those are. And it asks of accountable institutions to screen their current employees and prospective employees around competency and integrity, as well as ensure all their employees are not on the targeted financial sanctions list, also referred to as the TFS, in order to identify, monitor, manage, and reduce the risk of money laundering, terrorist financing, and proliferation financing. Before I get into what all that means, let's look at who is deemed as accountable institutions. This is any organization that offers, I would say, financial products, so like long-term insurance, lending securities, short-term insurance, traveler's checks, Forex, when we look at banks, development corporation finance, and so forth. But you'll see in this directive, they included as well as your normal financing institutions in any shape or form, or lending institutions. They've included state agencies. And if you think about what the patterns and the trends we're seeing in money laundering, again, there's been data that shows that even property is nowadays being used as a method to bring illicit finance into the ecosystem, hold it there, and in times then go ahead and finance potentially terrorist activities. And that's why they added into that category in particular. Many organizations already have processes in place that scrutinize and screen customers when it comes to financial transactions, as we saw coming out of FICA. However, there are gaps when it comes to their own employees. And Directive 8's interest is to make sure that as an organization, you are not exposed internally, perhaps with an employee that unknowingly is part of a anti-money laundering syndicate or part of financing terrorism in some way, and uses your organization to enable those activities. It is important as an organization, you are accountable as per this directive to ensure that you have the controls in place, do the right due diligence on your employees to make sure that they too are not participating in this and using your organization to do so. When you think about Directive 8, there's really 4 elements that you need to consider to ensure that you are complying to this directive. And I'm just putting them here, and then I'll walk through each one. So firstly, every accountable institution must screen all prospective and current employees for competency and integrity. I'll explain what that means. They have to ensure that all their current employees are not on the targeted financial sanctions list. It expects you to follow a risk-based approach and prove that you do have that. An imperative is you've also got to do record keeping of all your outcomes and all your screening, and that I will also go through what that means for you. And at the end, the intent of it is that if you look at it in totality, It's to ensure that there's no person in your organization that can be easily swayed to commit financial crime and is doing that through your organization. And without these controls, your organization will be exposed. So let's take the first element of what is required for you to comply with when it comes to Directive 8. As I said, the first consideration is that you screen prospective employees and current employees for competency and integrity. When we talk about competency from Directive 8 perspective, it is asking you to ensure that all employees in your organization have got the necessary skills, knowledge, and expertise to perform their function. When it comes to financial transaction and financial intelligence, they know what is required of them so that they don't commit financial crime. This directive gives you flexibility on how you assure and test around competency. But some of the things you want to consider is when you are employing your individuals, do the relevant check around previous history. Do they have the right references? Did you go ahead and verify their qualifications and their credentials before you hire them? Again, you are expected and accountable to assure that the people that you brought in are competent to execute their job. They have the right competency to do so. From an integrity perspective, the word integrity often case relates to that they do perform their functions honestly with the right morals and expectations. And here, things for you to consider when screening for integrity is, have you done criminal checks specifically for financial crime? So if you think about Directive 8, it's everything around terrorism, financing, anti-money laundering. So this is not any kind of crime. So, it's a bad example, but if they had a criminal record for domestic abuse or those things, that is not in the ambient of Directive 8. It is all crimes that relate to financial crimes. Did you go ahead and do those due diligence? And depending on your finding, was there any risk? So did the data show that this employee is at risk, perhaps, of being manipulated or swayed? And then what controls did you then put in place? When it comes to the first requirement of Directive 8 on screening employees for competency and integrity, what is expected of you as an organization is to then, when you think about it from a risk-based perspective, is to screen employees based primarily more on the risk or exposure that they bring to your organization. So, for example, if you do your basic screening, either of qualifications or integrity, and you do find some data elements that are concerning or potential exposure, based on the results and the risk exposure that the individual's profile has brought, you are then expected to do extended due diligence in scrutinizing that individual, right? And when Gerard does present, he'll share some of the data points available for you that we can assist you in doing your extended due diligence. But extended due diligence does not only look at just the individual and also understanding their exposure. It goes beyond just them. So consideration is your employee a known associate of someone that's been linked to terrorism, as an example? Is your family member, are they a family member of politically exposed people that have been charged of corruption and all those things? So, in the South African context, we have the Zondo Commission. Is there any associations there? All those can easily move what is an employee that works for you into a high-risk category. And when they are in that high-risk category, Directive 8 expects you to then prove and show that you've extended the due diligence or the screening of that individual to make sure that you're not exposed. Also for consideration is what is known as, high risk terrorist financing geographic areas. So there are countries and areas or zones that have been identified as high risk for terrorism financing. And if one of your employees is a national of that area, they fall under your high risk category. So again, there is an expectation for you to be able to do extended due diligence. What's very important as you're looking at that first compliance area or pillar is you are going to have a method in your organization of almost defining all the criteria that you want to search for or screen that could classify employees as high risk, and then be very clear what your extended and due diligence plan or program looks like for each of those. So as part of your risk management plan, what are the key risk elements? What are the key risk roles? Who falls into that classification? And then what extended due diligence will suffice for you to prove that you've mitigated against that risk? When we look at the next pillar, this one applies to all your employees. So it doesn't matter whether they're from they're national of a high risk area, whether they are a family member of, people that have been named or associated with terrorism or corruption. It doesn't matter. This is all your employees. This could be your agent that is selling your financial services products or any other products that you offer, or it could even be your receptionist or cleaner. Every single employee in your organization, Directive 8 requires of you to screen them against the targeted financial sanctions list. Now, what we found with a lot of our customers is there is oftentimes, firstly, screening does happen as part of your recruitment process when you employ the individuals. However, it does not happen throughout the lifetime of that employee. And a big learning and a gap that was identified in the assessment through a factor is that lots of companies then can assure, but through the lifetime, as they work with you, as they deal with your product, as they know that they are an employee of your organization, that's when they are often targeted by different individuals to then hide or participate in anti-money laundering and terrorist finance activities. And this is why it has to be ongoing. It is not once off. Also, what we discovered with our clients, not only is there a pattern of it being just once off versus ongoing, is that we screen for your typical FICA requirements. Is it the right ID? Is it the right person? Do they have a criminal record? One that was identified as a gap is your specific targeted financial sanctions list. So global list, it gets updated if someone is flagged. Perhaps they were in a different country and they were involved in terrorist financing or other activities. Every country then contributes and updates those names. The names are updated on a regular basis, so it cannot be once-off screening. And you want to make sure that knowingly or unknowingly, you're not paying a salary to any individual that sits on that list. So this applies to all your employees. And in case you might not be aware, on the FIC Act, so Section 226B is very specific. It says no person may provide economic support, financial or other services to any person that is listed on the TFS list. And if you think about it, if you are not screening or checking that your employees are not on that list, you could be unknowingly providing financial support by giving them a salary month on month. And this is why this element was added into the directive, right? You don't have to screen former employees, or when an employee resigns and leaves your organization, you no longer have to screen them as long as they are currently employed in your organization. You need to be doing this. Directive does say that as and when the list is updated, you have to screen them. So if you think about this, this is an area that you potentially want to just automate. Firstly, starting off with doing base screening for all your current employees, but also scheduling that you automatically get those updates. When those updates come, you then run it through your employee data set. And if there isn't a match, you're good to go. If there is a match, then you would want to you then would need to make sure that you act around that and then go ahead and put the right remediation. Something I did forget to mention, this whole directive has to be implemented in the context of labor laws and all other, and things like POPI as well, or privacy laws. Please do consider that. It does not, the Directive 8 is a financial intelligence and financial crimes it's a directive and is mandated by the Financial Intelligence Act. However, it is for you to make sure that you are also then complying with everything else. By the way, if in your employment contracts, if there isn't a provision around your implications, if someone in your organization does not, around anything that has to do with, financing of terrorism or anti-money laundering and all those things, that's also an element that you want to consider as you think about this directive. Then moving on, the next thing you need to consider to make sure that you comply with Directive 8 is really the guidance and the expectation that the directive has, that you've got to prove that you've used a risk-based approach. There is an understanding when we think about Directive 8, and it's very much in the sentiment of the directive, that not all the employees in your organization pose the same risk. If you think about it, not everyone in your organization is able to manipulate transactions or to overlook the sale of financial instruments for people that perhaps are known terrorists or finance terrorism. So when it comes to your customers, not everyone is able to influence that and bring that risk exposure on clients. So for those people that sit in a position, in a decision-making position, they sit on committees, they're senior managers, they're able to change customer data, manipulate it in any way. Those are the kind of individuals that you want to classify and categorize as high risk. And for those ones, there is an expectation for you to prove that you are doing the relevant screening and specifically doing the relevant due diligence or extended due diligence, and you have the right controls in place. Yeah? So you want to look at the level that the role or the individual plays in your organization, that they are able to influence anything to do with money laundering, terrorism financing, and proliferation financing. Now, if you're already in a financial institution, you probably know about the expectation from the FIG for you to have a risk management compliance program in place. And all this it really is proof of just your risk-based approach. What are the risks that you're mitigating against? What are the legislation requirements? What are the compliance or controls that you have in place? And now with Directive 8, what is the classification of high-risk roles? What is your screening process and procedures? What do you do for basic screening, extended screening? What is the process around targeted financials list? All of this sits in your RMPC, and it really is proof. And again, we support our clients and really recommend you want to have that digital because it's rule-based. If you think about risks, especially when it comes to employees, depending on the criteria or depending on the risk exposure, there's different controls that you'll apply for that category of role or that category of risk as well. All of this, Directive 8, again, you've got to manage the frequency of your assessment. It was easy when we were just applying the controls when employees started, but now it has to be periodic. It has to be ingoing, depending on the role or depending on the trigger event as well. Often we find this with a lot of our customers, they forget the trigger event. So you might only screen me, depending on my role, once every year. However, immediately you put me on a committee that's approving investment, improving products, improving deals. That is a trigger event for you to then reclassify the frequency and the extent in which you will then screen myself as an employee as well. Directive 8 does specify that for all your high-risk roles, you've got to screen at a minimum once a year. And when I say screen, I'm talking about your extended due diligence. Remember, when it comes to the second bullet, that for the targeted financial sanctions, everyone, and you want to do that at a minimum annually. But for your high-risk roles in your extended due diligence, it specifies at a minimum periodically. As much as we're talking about, following a risk-based approach, ultimately what is more important to put in your RMPC is going to be the mitigation. So all the results that you find, whether it's around competency and integrity, whether it's around the TFS list, is very, very important is what is the mitigation of then the risk? What have you done with that employee that has been flagged? And so forth. So some way consider a method and a way to already a predefined and method and a way to then mitigate those risks and be able to action almost immediately. The last element of Directive 8 that you then want to ensure that you comply with and is specified is that of record keeping, right? The Directive 8 specifies that you have to keep the record, both that proves your risk-based approach, classification of your high-risk process, what screening for competency and integrity you're doing, the targeted financials, what's your frequency, when did you update that, did you then do the screening as it's being updated? You've got to keep records of that. And very importantly, you've got to keep records of the screening results. Remember, you're screening your employees every time the targeted financials sanctions list is updated. You've got to keep the results of what were the results of each of those screening tests for that particular employee that you found, and proof that that was actually done. The FIC during the audits have a right to, and are by the directive, to come and request that evidence, to come and request the process and that you followed, and just confirmation and proof of the results that you found. And again, failing which could expose your organizations to sanctions as well as penalties. So just to really sum it up, Directive 8, released in March the 31st, the intent is very clear, is to strengthen the controls across organizations when it comes to internal, in terms of reducing the risk for anti-money laundering, terrorism financing, and proliferation financing. This was a significant gap. Organizations unknowingly are either financing individuals that are exposed, or even your employees become suspect to terrorists and terrorist groups, and all these suspicious transactions are then only continued and enabled by organizations. You've got to make sure that you're screening them when they start and throughout the lifetime. You've got to check before you employ them around competency. You've got to check from an integrity perspective, criminal records and all those things. For your high-risk employees, you've got to make sure you've got a process of doing extended due diligence, their exposure when it comes to family members and other individuals in their circles, right? And you've got to screen all your employees against the targeted financial sanctions list, ensuring that each time it is updated, you are also going ahead and getting the latest information and just verifying that none of your employees are there. It's important that you've got a method, you've got a system of applying that risk-based approach and proving and keeping the records and evidence should you be requested to do so by the FIC. Hope this is helpful. I do want to pass on to Gerard then that can show you how we enable this from an organization perspective and how you can automate. Over to you, Gerard.
Thanks, Karabo. Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. I'm Gerard Fourie, Pre-Sales Solutions Architect for Cyber South Africa. And Cyber solves for Directive 8 requirements by having already integrated into numerous different data providers, determining if an individual or business is sanctioned, if he's politically exposed, or if he's got any adverse media findings against him. And this includes known associates and some other data points as well. Now, this allows you not only to screen against targeted financial sanctions, but also hundreds of other international lists which are actively maintained for sanctions, financial regulatory, and also law enforcement. Now, our solution includes ongoing monitoring of all of your employees. So through nightly screening, you place an individual on this list and he would then be screened on a nightly basis. And we would trigger alerts that you can either view in a portal, and I'll expand a bit on the solution just now, for any potential matches for anyone that was matched against any one of those lists. Now, these services can be triggered on a schedule, so they can be completely API driven, and I'll explain some of that just now, where systems you might already have in place would be talking to us, or you can trigger these through a due diligence portal. So you can log into a portal and perform these screenings yourself on an ad hoc basis. Now, our platform's capabilities allow us to easily update any of the workflows or rules, set up reminders, and the purpose of this is to get to a 360 due diligence view of all of your employees, while streamlining these processes with intelligent automation wherever possible. Now, this illustration shows graphically what a typical flow for one of these solutions looks like. We would have to receive a feed from yourself. So from an input perspective, so either receive a Excel file or connect to your existing onboarding solution or recruitment platform, or it can even be triggered by email. What we then do is all of the service orchestration. And what happens here is we call this TFS lists, we call other sanctions lists through our data providers, can connect to internal lists or any of your other supply chain type solutions. And we bring all of this data back into our service orchestration. And from here, we then run those against a rule set. These rule set would tell us, based on these matches found or not found, a certain path needs to be followed from there and a specific outcome. Either if nothing is found, go through to an approval, or otherwise, if there's a potential match found and it needs to be eyeballed, maybe a manager needs to review that, or in instances, need to do enhanced due diligence. Now, this is where you'd have to do additional checks because there's a flag or a alert on this individual, and from there to trigger we can trigger something like a lifestyle audit. Now, with a lifestyle audit, you can look at, let's say, deeds linkages or financed vehicles linked to an individual. Are they linked to any trusts? And there's other identity verification, address verification, etc. type lookups that we can do as well as part of that enhanced due diligence. And then the outputs of this would then be either sending this response back to the system that sent it to us, so to your recruitment platform. Alternatively, it can be sent back on an email. We can generate a report and send it in that way, or then also produce the results on a due diligence platform. So a platform where you can log in and look at the results with basic dashboarding. You can see what was the outcome of each one of these individual screenings, or then the lifestyle audit, and drill down into all of those specific details to see what happened. You can manage part of your employee risk in this way and perform workflows and approvals on a portal like this. Now, there's many other case management capabilities that the platform also includes. And maybe to zoom in on this one component. So at that point where you onboard, or when your periodic review is triggered, we'd set up schedules based on that risk-based approach that you choose based on those employees to do schedule-driven ongoing monitoring. So at the point when that schedule triggers, the same service orchestration, rules engine, etc. would trigger. And as Karabo mentioned earlier, that is what we see is one of the biggest gaps with organizations that already have screening at onboarding stage, is the ongoing, and specifically the automation of that ongoing monitoring. And now, typically, this type of solution is consumed as a software as a service. That means per employee that we screen, there's a fee that you'd have to pay, or per employee that you do an enhanced due diligence on. And there's also volume-based discounts when it comes to this. So the more transactions comes through, the less you pay per transaction. Now, the only setup that would be required from yourselves is the connector. So getting the information or the request from yourselves and then sending that response back to you. So depending on your technology landscape, we can then enable this. So if you want to see the results on a portal, you won't necessarily need a connector there or integration. So it depends really, but the rest of the solution is really a end-to-end there, ready to be consumed. Now, all of these Directive 8 requirements are enabled by our locally developed platform. It allows us to build enterprise-grade applications quickly and effectively. And also partnering with Cyber provides you with local support, pricing flexibility, and various other options when it comes to implementation approaches. If it's on the cloud, if you want to host something on premise, we are very flexible. And I invite you to explore other use cases we solve for as well in the regulatory technology space beyond Directive 8 and sanction screening. And you'll find some of those use cases on our website. Karabo, just checking in with you if there was something you wanted to additional to mention.
No, Gerard. I think you've stressed that what this solution offers is the ease of compliance through automation. I think the key message from us is don't leave your business vulnerable and exposed, either through employees with ill intent, or even groups, terrorism finances, that can see that the controls are not in place and come in and manipulate employees in your organization. Therefore, automating this process will ensure that, one, you are it's an ease of experience, you're compliant, and very, very critical, should the FIC want evidence, it's already provided for in the application, in the solutions, and in the reports.
Yeah, I think the audit history that you get with case management platforms like these, ability to trigger notifications and alerts, is where the real value sits.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Gerard, and thank you to the participants for joining us. We trust this has been valuable, and should there be any questions and specifics, we are here to be able to support and assist. Shiona, over to you.
Thank you both, Gerard and Karabo, for your time this morning, and to all our audience that's participated. We appreciate it. We will send you a copy of this presentation after this webinar. Thank you again, everybody. Have a good day. Bye-bye.